The moving truck pulled away, leaving Diane Martinez standing alone in front of what looked like a carnival nightmare frozen in time. The building sprawled across an entire city block, its facade a confusion of warped glass panels that reflected her scared face back at her in a dozen distorted variations. 3-year-old Sofia clutched her mother's leg, staring up at the structure with wide eyes. "Mommy, the building is looking at me funny." She wasn't wrong. The Hall of Mirrors, or what remained of it, seemed to watch them with its fractured glass eyes. Diane had inherited it from her great-uncle Marcus, a man she'd met exactly once at a family reunion when she was 7.
If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today.
He'd been strange even then, muttering about reflections that moved wrong and doors that led nowhere. The inheritance notice had arrived the same week she'd been evicted from their studio apartment. 4 months behind on rent, her car repossessed, credit cards maxed out paying for Sofia's asthma medications. The timing felt like a miracle or a trap. "Let's go see our new home, baby." Diane forced cheerfulness into her voice as she pulled the rusty key from the lawyer's envelope. The front door required 3 tries before it opened with a groan that sounded almost human. Inside, the smell of must and something sweet, like cotton candy left to rot, overwhelmed them. Diane's flashlight beam, her phone had been disconnected weeks ago, cut through the darkness to reveal chaos. The main corridor stretched impossibly long, lined on both sides with mirrors of every size and shape. Some were cracked. Others were covered with yellowed sheets. A few reflected nothing at all, just empty darkness where Diane and Sofia should have been. "Why can't I see me?" Sofia pointed at one of the empty mirrors. "It's just broken, sweetheart." But Diane's skin prickled. The mirror's frame was intact. The glass looked perfect. It simply showed the opposite wall instead of their reflections. They explored cautiously. The building had been a tourist attraction in the 1960s, part of an amusement pier that had burned down in 1982. Somehow this structure had survived, though survived was generous. Water damage stained the walls. Plaster hung in sheets. Entire sections of floor sagged ominously. But the mirrors were pristine. Every surface reflected, multiplied, distorted. Diane saw herself as a giant, a dwarf, stretched thin, compressed fat. Sofia giggled at first, making faces at her warped reflections. Then she went silent, staring at one particular mirror near what had been the ticket booth. "That girl is sad," Sofia said softly. Diane looked. The mirror showed their reflections normally enough, but Sofia was right. There was something in the reflected Sofia's expression, a depth of sorrow no 3-year-old should carry. "It's just the lighting, baby. Come on, let's find where we can sleep." The second floor had apparently been office space. One room held a desk, filing cabinets, and a cot with a surprisingly clean mattress. Diane found blankets in a closet that smelled of mothballs but were intact. They'd have to make do. That night, as Sofia slept fitfully beside her, Diane reviewed the papers the lawyer had given her. Marcus Navarro had owned the Hall of Mirrors outright, no mortgage, no liens. But he'd also accumulated $47,000 in back taxes. She had 6 months to pay or the city would seize the property. $47,000. It might as well be 47 million. Her phone, she'd kept it despite the disconnected service for the flashlight and calculator, showed $31.67 in her bank account. Her last paycheck from the diner where she'd worked doubles wouldn't clear for another week, and that was only $243 after they took out the garnishment for medical bills. Diane lay in the darkness, listening to the buildings settle around them. Somewhere, glass clinked against glass. Wind, probably. Old buildings made noises. Then she heard it clearly. Footsteps. Light ones, like a child running. She grabbed the flashlight and crept to the door. The second-floor hallway stretched before her, empty except for the mirrors that lined every wall. In the beam of light, she saw movement. A reflection running past, though nothing moved in the actual hallway. Just a trick of the light, she told herself. Mirrors did that. Reflected things from odd angles. But the reflection had been a little girl in an old-fashioned dress. And it had been running towards something, or away from something, with desperate urgency. Diane locked their door and pushed the desk against it. Tomorrow, in daylight, everything would make more sense. Morning brought no comfort. Sofia woke with a fever, her asthma flaring in the dusty air. Diane had one emergency inhaler left, and her daughter's prescription had run out last month. The clinic wanted $200 up front for the appointment, plus whatever the medication cost. She left Sofia on the cot with a coloring book and descended to explore. Maybe Marcus had left something of value she could sell. Furniture, equipment, anything to cover Sofia's medical care. The ground floor yielded nothing but broken carnival equipment and water-damaged promotional materials. The basement door was locked, and none of her keys fit. But the third floor was where things got strange. The entire level was one vast room, completely lined with mirrors. Not just the walls, but the ceiling and floor too. Walking into it was like stepping into infinity. Diane saw herself reflected 1,000 times, each image slightly different, as if showing versions of her from parallel lives. In one reflection, she wore a business suit. In another, a wedding dress. In a third, she looked years older, lined with worry. But one reflection made her stop cold. In it, she wasn't alone. A man stood beside her, Marcus, she realized, recognizing him from that long-ago reunion. And he was pointing urgently at something behind them. Diane spun around. Nothing but more mirrors. When she looked back, the reflection showed only her again, alone and confused. "You're losing it," she muttered. "Stress. Hunger. Fear. Pick your poison." But as she turned to leave, her foot caught on something. A floorboard that sat higher than the others. She knelt, examining it. The board was loose, deliberately so. She pried it up and found a metal box underneath. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside were bundles of cash, old bills but legal tender. She counted with disbelief. $20,000. $20,000 hidden under a loose board. A note lay beneath the money, written in shaky handwriting, for emergencies. "There's more, so much more, but you have to see it to believe it. Trust the mirrors. They show what's real, not what seems. Marcus." Diane clutched the money to her chest, tears streaming down her face. Sofia's medicine. The taxes, at least some of them. Food. Time to figure out what to do next. But Marcus's note nagged at her. "There's more, so much more. Trust the mirrors." She looked around the mirror room again. Every surface reflected, but now she noticed something. One mirror, floor-length and ornately framed in the far corner, showed her reflection walking toward it. But she wasn't moving. No, that wasn't quite right. She wasn't moving, but her reflection was. It walked forward, turned, and beckoned her to follow. Diane approached slowly. As she got closer, the reflection changed. Instead of showing the mirror room, it showed a different space. A hallway she hadn't seen before, lined with doors. And standing in that hallway was a little girl in an old-fashioned dress. The same girl whose reflection had run past last night. The girl in the mirror pressed her hand against the glass from the inside. Her mouth moved, but no sound came through. She was trying to tell Diane something, trying to warn her or guide her. Diane reached out and touched the mirror's surface. It was cold, but not solid. Her fingers sank into the glass like water. She jerked back, heart hammering. The girl in the mirror looked desperate now, still trying to communicate. Then she pointed downward, to the frame of the mirror itself. Carved into the wood, almost hidden by dust, were words, "What you seek is what you see." Diane studied her reflection more carefully. Not the one that moved independently, but her actual reflection standing there in the mirror room.
If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this.
Behind her reflected self, she could see all the other mirrors, and in those reflections, more reflections, and in those. There. In a reflection of a reflection of a reflection, so deep in the mirror maze that it was barely visible, she saw it. A door. Red, ornate, completely unlike anything else in the building. But when she turned to look directly, there was only wall. "Trust the mirrors," she whispered. "They show what's real, not what seems." She returned her attention to the impossible reflection. The red door existed somewhere in this building, but only the mirrors could show her where. She'd have to navigate by reflection alone, trusting what she saw in the glass rather than what appeared before her eyes. It took an hour of careful work. Moving through the mirror room, watching reflections instead of reality. Several times she found herself standing before blank walls, but her reflection showed doors. When she pushed, the walls gave way, revealing passages that shouldn't exist. The architecture made no sense. Rooms that were larger on the inside than outside. Staircases that went up but led down. Corridors that curved back on themselves in impossible loops. The Hall of Mirrors wasn't just a building. It was a labyrinth designed to hide something. And the mirrors were the map. She navigated by reflected light, following the glimpse of that red door through layer after layer of reality. The building seemed to resist, showing her dead ends, but also guide her with carefully placed mirrors that revealed the true path. Finally, she stood in a small room she'd have sworn didn't exist 20 minutes ago. And there, exactly where the deepest reflection had shown it, was the red door. Her hand trembled as she reached for the handle. Behind her, in the room's single mirror, she saw the little girl again. This time, the girl smiled and nodded encouragement. Diane opened the door. The room beyond defied belief. Small, windowless, but every inch of wall space was covered with safe deposit boxes. The old-fashioned kind with individual locks and numbers. There had to be hundreds of them. In the center of the room sat a desk with a ledger and another note from Marcus: "You made it." Smarter than most of the family, who couldn't see past what seemed real to what was. Each box has a number. The ledger tells you what's inside. Take what you need. But read the full story first. You deserve to know why. The key is where you're not. Diane looked around. Where she wasn't. She was standing right here. Unless. She looked in the room's single mirror. Her reflection stood there, but in the reflection, something hung around her neck that she wasn't actually wearing. A key on a chain. Following instinct born of the last hour's impossible journey, Diane reached not for her own neck, but into the mirror. Her hand passed through the glass, and her fingers closed around cold metal. She pulled out a key that existed in the reflection but not in reality. Until now. The key solidified in her hand, becoming real. The ledger was thick, filled with Marcus's neat handwriting. She opened to the first page and began to read. My father, Roberto Navarro, bought this property in 1978 for $650 at a police auction. The previous owner had died under mysterious circumstances. The building was considered cursed. 3 people had vanished inside during its operating years. No bodies ever found. But Papa didn't believe in curses. He believed in opportunity. He'd been a mirror maker in Mexico City before immigrating. He understood glass, reflection, light. When he explored the Hall of Mirrors, he saw what others had missed. The building wasn't cursed. It was constructed as a vault. Someone, sometime in the 1920s, had used the mirror maze as a hiding place. During Prohibition, we think, or maybe the Depression. Someone had accumulated massive wealth and needed to hide it where no one would think to look. Not in a basement or behind walls, but in plain sight, hidden by reflection and misdirection. Papa found the first cash in 1979. Gold coins in a false-backed mirror. He never spent them, just documented everything. He was an honest man, hoped to find the original owner or their heirs. But the property had changed hands a dozen times. The original builder had died in the fire that destroyed the pier. There were no heirs, no claims. So Papa started using the money carefully. He supported the family, helped relatives immigrate, paid for my education. But he was cautious, afraid that someone might come looking. He explored deeper, finding more caches. Gold, silver, jewelry, cash from 6 different decades. Always in the mirrors, hidden by reflection, accessible only to those who understood how to navigate by glass instead of sight. When Papa died in 1993, I took over. I spent 30 years mapping every reflection, finding every cache, documenting everything. The original owner, I eventually discovered, was a magician named Theodore Glass. He performed at the pier and owned the Hall of Mirrors. He'd been a con man too, running an elaborate insurance fraud scheme that made him wealthy in the 1920s. But he was also a genius. He designed this place as the ultimate hiding spot. The mirrors aren't just glass. They're placed at precise angles, creating optical illusions that make spaces seem not to exist. Whole rooms are hidden in plain sight, visible only in reflection. By my calculation, glass hid over $400 million here, in various forms. Gold, gems, securities that I never cashed, rare coins, art. It's all documented in this ledger. Every box number, every cache, every reflection that leads to treasure. I never took more than I needed. I was waiting for the right person. Family, but not just blood, someone smart enough to find this place, desperate enough to need it, and good-hearted enough to use it wisely. The mirrors whispered about you, Diane. Yes, I know how crazy that sounds. But in the decades I spent here, I learned the building has its own awareness. And it told me about a young mother who would need help. Who would see through illusions to truth. Who would trust what seemed impossible. The money is yours. All of it. The building is yours. But more than that, the purpose is yours. Theodore Glass stole this wealth. Use it to give back what was taken. Use it to help others drowning in the same desperation you faced. And beware. I was never sure if Glass died in that fire or if he simply vanished like the others. Sometimes, in the deepest reflections, I saw him watching. If he's still out there, in whatever space exists beyond mirrors, he might not like you taking what he hid. Trust the girl. She's been here longer than any of us, one of the vanished from the early days. She'll help you navigate. She wants the wealth used for good, to make up for whatever brought her here. Welcome to the Hall of Mirrors. Welcome to your inheritance. Use it wisely. Marcus. Diane sat back, head spinning. $400 million. Hidden in a building that defied physics, guarded by the ghost of a vanished girl, left by a con man who might still be haunting the mirrors. She should have felt terrified. Instead, she felt purpose crystallize. Sofia needed medicine. They needed food, safety, a real home. But beyond that, she thought of every family in that homeless shelter they'd stayed in briefly. Every kid she'd seen at the free clinic, sick because their parents couldn't afford doctors. Every desperate person choosing between food and rent. The wealth was here. Stolen once, maybe, but that made it perfect for giving back. She opened the ledger to the detailed inventory. Box 47 contained $50,000 in cash, recent enough to spend without questions. Box 103 held gold coins worth approximately $200,000. Box 156 contained diamonds appraised at $1.2 million. The list went on for hundreds of pages. Diane used Marcus's key to open Box 47. The cash was there, exactly as documented, wrapped in plastic and pristine. She took $10,000, enough for Sofia's medicine, some food, a deposit on an electrician to make this place livable. The rest she'd save for taxes and emergencies. As she closed the box, movement caught her eye. In the room's mirror, the little girl appeared again. This time, she wasn't alone. A man stood behind her, tall, thin, wearing a 1920s-era suit. He had the calculating eyes of a con man who'd seen every angle. Theodore Glass. He didn't look threatening, just observational. studying Diane the way someone might study a chess opponent. Then he smiled, tipped his hat, and vanished. The little girl remained. She pointed at Diane, then at herself, then at the door. An invitation or a warning. Come back. There's more to know. Diane left the red room carefully, memorizing the path through reflection. She'd need to map it properly, make sure she could find her way again. The money in her pocket felt heavy with possibility and responsibility. Upstairs, Sofia was awake and struggling to breathe. Diane administered the last of the inhaler, then wrapped her daughter in blankets. We're going to see the doctor, baby. And this time, we can pay. The clinic visit revealed Sofia needed prescription steroids and a new daily inhaler. $437 total. Diane paid cash without flinching. The relief on the doctor's face told her he'd expected her to beg for charity or leave without treatment. She'll be much better in a few days, he promised. At the pharmacy, Diane bought the medications plus a week's worth of real groceries. Milk, fresh fruit, meat, vegetables. Things she'd been rationing or skipping for months. The cashier's surprised expression when she paid with $100 bills reminded Diane that she needed to be more careful. Large cash transactions drew attention. That night, after Sofia fell asleep with her new inhaler on the nightstand, Diane returned to exploring. She'd seen maybe a tenth of the building. If Marcus was right about the total wealth hidden here, there were dozens more caches to find. The mirrors guided her to a second-floor room she'd walked past a dozen times. But tonight, a reflection showed a door where she'd only seen wall. Behind it was a bathroom, surprisingly clean, with running water. The pipes rattled but worked. Basic plumbing she could use while making repairs. In the bathroom mirror, the girl appeared. Up close, Diane saw she was maybe 9 years old, with dark hair and braids and a dress from the 1950s. She looked sad but not frightening. Lonely, Diane realized. Trapped in reflections for decades. Can you hear me? Diane asked. The girl's reflection nodded. Are you one of the people who vanished? Another nod. Did glass hurt you? The girl's expression turned complicated. She held up her hands in a SOSO gesture, then pointed at the mirror frame. Carved there, nearly invisible, were initials, CM 1952. Catherine? Diane guessed. Catherine M? The girl, Catherine, smiled and nodded enthusiastically. I'm Diane. That's Sofia, my daughter. She gestured toward their room. We're going to live here. Fix this place up. Is that okay? Catherine nodded again, then held up one finger in a wait gesture. She disappeared from the mirror and reappeared a moment later, this time reflected in the bathroom's second mirror. She pointed at something behind the reflection. Diane turned to look at the actual wall. Nothing. But in the mirror, Catherine stood next to a small door at floor level, like a cabinet. Following the pattern she'd learned, Diane reached into the wall where the mirror showed the door. Her hand passed through solid plaster like it was water, finding a latch. She pulled, and a section of wall swung open, revealing a genuine cabinet she could now see and touch. Inside were more bundles of cash and a photo album. The album's first page showed a family, mother, father, and a young girl in a 1950s dress. Catherine. The last page showed Catherine alone, older, maybe 15, standing in front of the hall of mirrors with a man Diane recognized from Marcus's description. Theodore Glass. He hired you, Diane said softly. You worked here. Catherine nodded, her reflection sad. And something happened. You got caught in, whatever this place is. Another nod. Catherine pointed at Glass, then at her own chest, then made a pulling motion. He trapped her somehow, pulled her into the mirrors. To guard the treasure? Catherine nodded, then shook her head, then made a complex gesture Diane struggled to interpret. Not just to guard. She pointed at Glass, at the treasure, at herself, then covered her eyes. A secret she wasn't supposed to see. You saw where he'd hidden the money. He couldn't let you leave. Catherine's reflection flickered with emotion. Anger, sadness, resignation. Decades of being trapped in glass, watching life continue without her. "I'm going to help you," Diane promised, though she had no idea how. "And I'm going to use this money the right way. For people who need it." Catherine smiled and placed her palm against the mirror from inside. Diane matched it from outside. For a moment, she could swear she felt warmth, as if the boundary between reflection and reality thinned. Over the following weeks, Diane established a routine. Days were spent making the Hall of Mirrors livable, hiring electricians, plumbers, cleaners. She paid cash for everything, varying amounts, using different contractors to avoid questions. The building slowly transformed from nightmare to home. She filed the proper paperwork to have the property rezoned, claiming she was converting it to apartments. The tax office accepted her $10,000 payment on the back taxes, agreeing to a payment plan for the rest. Bureaucrats were surprisingly helpful when you actually had money. Nights were spent exploring. Catherine proved an invaluable guide, appearing in mirrors throughout the building to show Diane the safe paths. Some areas were dangerous, floors that wouldn't support weight, mirrors with cracks that could cut. But Catherine knew them all, protecting them from hazards. Together, they found cache after cache. Box 234 held stock certificates from the 1920s, issued by companies long dissolved but potentially valuable to collectors. Box 312 contained jewelry that took Diane's breath away, diamonds, emeralds, pearls, all stolen from wealthy Mark's glass had conned. Box 419 held rare gold coins that Marcus had valued at over $3 million. The ledger was meticulous, but Diane added her own notes. She'd need to be careful converting this wealth into usable funds. Too much at once would trigger investigations. She'd have to be smart, patient, strategic. Sofia thrived with proper medicine and nutrition. Her cough disappeared. Her energy returned. She played in the mirror rooms, talking to Catherine like they were best friends. To Sofia, having a ghost companion was perfectly normal. "Catherine says there's a scary man," Sofia mentioned casually one evening. "He watches sometimes. But she says if we're good, he can't hurt us." "Scary how?" Diane kept her voice light. "His face is wrong. Like he's wearing someone else's skin. Catherine says he's not really here, just stuck between. But he wants to be here again." Theodore Glass, Diane thought. Still lingering somehow. That night, she saw him in the mirror room. Not threatening, just observing from deep in the reflections. His eyes followed her as she navigated the space, calculating, assessing. Then he tipped his hat again and faded. Messages started appearing. Written in the condensation on bathroom mirrors, traced in dust on neglected glass. Simple words, clever. Careful. Continue. Glass was communicating from whatever space he occupied. Not stopping her, but watching her every move. Diane wasn't sure if she should be terrified or grateful. His curse had trapped Catherine, but his genius had hidden wealth that was now saving Diane's life. She felt like she'd inherited both blessing and burden. 3 months in, Diane had paid all the back taxes and fully restored the building's utilities. The Hall of Mirrors was officially habitable. She'd even started legitimate income streams. The ground floor was being converted to retail space she could rent out, giving her visible, legal income to explain her improving circumstances. But she'd only accessed maybe $2 million of the hidden wealth. The ledger showed at least $400 million more, maybe $408 million total if her calculations were right. The sheer scope of it was overwhelming. She needed help. Someone who understood finance, could help her convert treasure into usable currency without attracting attention. But who could she trust with this secret? The answer came from an unexpected source. One morning, a woman appeared at the door. Mid-40s, professional attire, warm smile. "Ms. Martinez? I'm Jennifer Reeves. I'm executor of Marcus Navarro's estate. I wonder if we might talk." Diane tensed. Had Marcus left other family? Other claimants? But Jennifer's explanation eased her fears. Marcus left specific instructions. I was only to contact you after you'd been here 3 months. If you'd left or sold the property by then, I wasn't to reach out. But since you've stayed, he wanted you to have this. She handed Diane a thick envelope. Inside were documents, account information, and a letter. Dear Diane, Marcus wrote. If you're reading this, you've stayed. You've found at least some of what Glass hid. You've met Catherine. And you're realizing you need help managing this properly. Jennifer Reeves is that help. She's a financial advisor who specialized in helping lottery winners and sudden inheritors manage windfalls without destroying their lives. More importantly, she's trustworthy. I've worked with her for 20 years, converting Glass's treasure into legitimate wealth I could use for good. Tell her everything. Show her the ledger. She'll help you create the structures needed, trusts, foundations, investment portfolios. She'll help you use the money without it using you. You'll also find in this envelope the contact information for 3 other people, a lawyer who handles unusual estate matters, an accountant who specializes in complex asset recovery, and an appraiser who can properly value historical pieces without asking questions about provenance. These people are your team. Trust them. They've all worked with Glass's treasure before through me. They understand the need for discretion and the importance of using ill-gotten wealth to do genuine good. The money corrupted Glass. It burdened me. But I believe it will liberate you. You have the heart for this, Diane. The compassion to see past the wealth to the people it can help. One warning, Glass is not entirely gone. I never understood whether he's trapped, like Catherine, or if he chose to linger. But he watches. He tests. He wants to know if you're worthy of his life's work. Show him that good can come from greed. Show him that stolen wealth can still heal. And please, help Catherine. In all my years here, I never figured out how to free her. But maybe fresh eyes will see what I missed. She deserves rest. She deserves peace. Thank you for staying. Thank you for being brave enough to see the truth in the mirrors. Marcus. Diane looked up to find Jennifer smiling gently. I know this is all very strange. Marcus prepared me for your reaction. May I come in? I promise everything I've heard about you suggests you're handling this remarkably well. Over coffee at the newly functional kitchen table, Diane laid out the situation. Jennifer listened without judgment, occasionally nodding, taking notes. When Diane showed her the ledger, the financial advisor actually laughed. Marcus wasn't exaggerating. This is remarkable. And completely unmanageable without proper planning. She pulled out a laptop. Let me show you what we did with Marcus's finds. The presentation was professional and thorough. Marcus had established a private foundation that distributed approximately $200 million over 30 years. Scholarships for immigrant students. Medical bill assistance for families in crisis. Small business grants for struggling entrepreneurs. Housing assistance. Legal aid. Food security programs. All anonymous, Jennifer explained. All carefully structured to avoid publicity or questions about where the money came from. Marcus wanted the help to be real but invisible. I want to do the same, Diane said immediately. Maybe even more. I keep thinking about all the families like mine, drowning because they can't afford medicine or rent. If I have access to this much wealth, then you can save hundreds of families. Jennifer's expression turned serious. But you have to be smart. IRS, FBI, local authorities, they all notice when someone goes from eviction notice to philanthropy overnight. We'll need to pace this. Start small. Build legitimate income streams that explain your improved circumstances. Then gradually expand. They spent the next 6 hours planning. Jennifer would help establish a series of trusts and LLCs that could hold the converted wealth. The appraiser would begin evaluating pieces Diane could sell through proper channels. The lawyer would handle any legal complications. It would take years to fully monetize the $408 million, but they could start immediately helping people while building toward larger impact. "There's one more thing," Diane said as Jennifer prepared to leave. She told her about Catherine, about the ghost trapped in mirrors. Jennifer nodded slowly. Marcus mentioned her. He felt terrible that he couldn't help. She's conscious. Aware? Completely. She's lonely, scared, but she's been helping us. Protecting Sofia, guiding me through the mirror maze. She deserves freedom. I don't know anything about supernatural matters, Jennifer admitted. But I know researchers, historians, people who study unusual phenomena. Maybe someone knows how glass trapped her. If we understand the mechanism, we might find a way to reverse it. That night, after Sofia fell asleep, Diane descended to the mirror room. Catherine appeared immediately, reflected across dozens of surfaces simultaneously. "I met Jennifer," Diane said. "She's going to help us. Help me use the money properly and help you find freedom." Catherine's reflection brightened with hope. "I need to understand what Glass did. How he trapped you. Can you show me?" Catherine nodded. She began moving through the mirrors, and Diane followed her reflection. They descended into sections of the building Diane hadn't explored yet, guided only by Catherine's image appearing in strategic mirrors. Finally, they reached a basement room. This one wasn't in the ledger. It existed in a space between spaces, accessible only by following reflections through impossible angles. The room was circular, every inch of wall covered in mirrors. But these mirrors were different. Darker. Older. Their reflections showed not just what was but what had been and what might be. In the center of the room was a chair with leather straps. And on the floor, drawn in what looked like silver paint, was a complex symbol. Part geometry, part language Diane didn't recognize. Catherine's reflection appeared in every mirror simultaneously, all showing the same scene from slightly different angles. A teenage girl strapped to the chair. Glass standing over her, reading from a book. The symbol on the floor beginning to glow. "He performed a ritual," Diane whispered. "He trapped you intentionally." Catherine nodded. In the reflection, young Catherine struggled against the straps as Glass completed whatever working he was performing. Then the girl's body went limp, and her reflection began moving independently. Glass unstrapped the body, carried it somewhere. Left the reflection behind. "Where's your body?" Diane asked, though she feared the answer. Catherine pointed at one of the mirrors. Behind the glass was a small space, like a hidden closet. Inside, wrapped in cloth that had preserved it remarkably well, was skeletal remains in a rotted 1950s dress. Diane pressed her hands to her mouth, fighting nausea. Glass hadn't just trapped Catherine's spirit. He'd hidden her body within the very walls where her reflection was imprisoned. "We're going to fix this," Diane said firmly. "We're going to free you and give you a proper burial." Catherine's reflections all smiled through tears. Over the next few months, Diane worked multiple angles simultaneously. Jennifer's team began converting Glass's treasure into legitimate wealth. The appraiser quietly sold some of the jewelry through international auction houses. The rare coins went to collectors. Securities were researched and, where possible, cashed in. Money flowed into the trusts Jennifer had established. From there, it flowed out to people in need. Anonymous payments of medical bills. Surprise inheritances from distant relatives that covered rent for struggling families. Scholarships that appeared from foundations with generic names. Diane kept careful records, documenting every dollar spent on helping others. The ledger that had tracked stolen wealth now tracked returned blessings. Simultaneously, Jennifer connected Diane with Dr. Sarah Martinez, a folklorist who specialized in mirror mythology and supernatural phenomena. Dr. Martinez had published papers on liminal spaces, threshold guardians, and the role of reflections in magical practices. What Glass did, Dr. Martinez explained during her first visit, was trap Catherine's soul in the liminal space of reflection. Mirrors exist between what is and what appears to be. He used that in-between space as a prison. How do we free her? Reversing the ritual would be ideal, but we'd need Glass's original spell work. Short of that. She studied the basement room carefully. We need to give Catherine's spirit permission and pathway to move on. Right now, she's anchored to her physical remains and to Glass's binding. If we give her a proper burial with the right rituals, we might release her. But they'd need to be careful. Glass's spirit was also tied to this place. Disrupting his work might draw his attention in ways they weren't prepared for. They spent weeks planning. Dr. Martinez consulted with colleagues, researched similar cases, prepared a ritual she believed would work. Jennifer provided practical support, a discreet funeral director who'd handle Catherine's remains without questions, legal documentation to explain the body's presence. The night they chose was exactly 1 year after Diane had arrived at the Hall of Mirrors. Sofia was staying with Jennifer, safely away from whatever might happen. Diane, Dr. Martinez, the funeral director, and a priest Dr. Martinez trusted gathered in the basement room. They worked carefully, removing Catherine's remains from behind the mirror, treating them with respect and dignity. The priest blessed the body while Dr. Martinez performed counter-rituals to the ones Glass had used, speaking words in Latin and older languages. In the mirrors, Catherine's reflections watched with a mix of hope and fear. The air grew cold. Shadows deepened. And then, in every mirror simultaneously, Theodore Glass appeared. Not his reflection, his actual presence, manifesting from whatever space he'd occupied. He looked angry, violated, territorial. "You're breaking my work," his voice echoed from nowhere and everywhere. "She's mine. The guardian. The witness. You can't." "She's a child you murdered," Diane interrupted, surprised by her own courage. "Your work was evil. Your treasure was stolen. And your time is over." Glass lunged toward them, but Dr. Martinez was ready. She'd brought mirrors from the building and arranged them in a specific pattern. Glass's manifestation collided with his own reflections, becoming confused, fragmented. "Now," Dr. Martinez said. The priest completed the burial rites. Catherine's body was respectfully covered, ready for proper interment. And in that moment, Diane spoke directly to the mirrors. "Catherine Morales. You've served long enough. You've protected this place, guided us, helped us. We release you from all bonds. We free you from obligation. Go in peace. Move on to whatever comes next." The mirrors blazed with light. In every reflection, Catherine appeared, no longer trapped behind glass, but standing before it. She looked solid, real, fully present for the first time in decades. She smiled at Diane, waved at the spot where Sofia would have been, then turned toward a light that seemed to shine from within the mirrors themselves. She walked into it and vanished. The light faded. The mirrors returned to normal, showing only the actual room and its occupants. Glass's presence had disappeared as well, his hold on the space broken. Dr. Martinez released a shaky breath. "I think it worked." They buried Catherine's remains the next day in a proper cemetery. A small headstone marked her grave, Catherine Morales, 1943 to 1957. Finally at rest. Diane brought Sofia to visit once it was installed. They left flowers and told Catherine stories about what her guidance had meant to them. That night, Diane returned to the Hall of Mirrors expecting to feel Catherine's absence. Instead, she felt peace. The building itself seemed lighter, as if a weight had lifted. But in one mirror, the ornate one that had first shown Diane the path to the Red Room, a brief reflection appeared. Catherine, whole and happy, standing in sunlight. She waved once, then faded forever. "Thank you," Diane whispered. The work continued with renewed purpose. With Catherine freed and Glass's presence dispersed, the building felt truly theirs now. Diane expanded her plans significantly. The ground floor retail space was rented to a bookstore and a cafe, providing legitimate income and community gathering spaces. The second floor remained their living quarters, now beautifully renovated with comfortable bedrooms, a proper kitchen, and a study where Diane could manage the growing foundation work. The third-floor mirror room became something extraordinary, a private museum documenting the building's history, Theodore Glass's cons, Catherine's story, and the transformation of stolen wealth into charitable giving. Not for public viewing, but as a sacred record of truth, a reminder of where they'd come from and why the work mattered. And the hidden rooms, those impossible spaces accessible only by reflection? Those remained as functional vaults. The Red Room still held most of the $408 million in various forms. Diane and her team converted it gradually, methodically, always with purpose driving every decision. The Lillian Foundation, named for Sofia's middle name, was established with an initial $100 million endowment, though Diane planned to add substantially more over time. The foundation's mission was crystal clear: provide the kind of emergency assistance that Diane herself had desperately needed. Medical bill payments that prevented families from choosing between health and bankruptcy. Rent assistance that kept children from experiencing homelessness. Food security programs. Job training. Everything anonymous. Everything focused on families in crisis who'd fallen through society's cracks. Diane hired a small but dedicated staff, each person carefully vetted not just for skills but for heart. She sought out people who understood desperation because they'd lived it, a former homeless veteran who became their housing coordinator, a single mother who'd lost everything to medical debt and now managed their healthcare assistance program, a recovered addict who ran their employment services with fierce compassion born of personal understanding. The foundation operated from renovated offices in the Hall of Mirrors, though no one but Diane, Jennifer, and the core team knew about the impossible wealth hidden literally within the building's walls. To outside observers, the Lillian Foundation appeared to be a well-funded but unremarkable charitable organization, one of thousands doing good work with inherited money. Jennifer managed the financial complexity with expertise that bordered on artistry. The appraiser, a dignified woman named Dr. Eleanor Chang, found buyers for Glass's most valuable pieces through discreet channels: private collectors who asked no questions about provenance, auction houses in countries with less stringent documentation requirements, museums that accepted anonymous donations and provided tax receipts that created paper trails of legitimate income. The rare coins alone generated over $15 million in the first 2 years. The jewelry, much of it Art Deco pieces from Glass's prime con artist years, brought in another $8 million. Stock certificates from long-dissolved companies turned out to have surprising value to historical collectors and financial institutions settling ancient accounts. The accountant, a methodical man named Robert Chen, ensured everything was properly documented, taxes paid, records kept immaculate. He created a financial architecture so clean that even aggressive audits would find nothing but legitimate charitable work funded by legitimate asset sales from a legitimate inheritance. By the time Sofia started kindergarten at the local public school, Diane deliberately chose public over private, wanting her daughter to understand the world most people inhabited. The Lillian Foundation had helped over 300 families. Medical bills totaling $4.2 million had been paid. 57 families had been saved from eviction. 43 children had received scholarships covering everything from preschool to college. 18 small businesses had received startup funding. Each success was documented in Diane's personal ledger, a mirror image of Glass's ledger of theft. Where he had recorded scams and marks and stolen amounts, she recorded healings and families and gifted hope. The weight of the two ledgers side by side told a story about redemption that moved everyone who saw it. But the work revealed patterns that troubled Diane deeply. The sheer number of families teetering on the edge of catastrophe, one medical bill or job loss away from homelessness, suggested systemic failures beyond what any single foundation could address. She began expanding the mission, thinking bigger. "What if we don't just help people after they fall?" she asked Jennifer during one of their weekly strategy sessions. "What if we build systems that catch them before they fall?" That conversation led to the Foundation's second major initiative, the Safety Net Project. Working with local hospitals, the Foundation established funds that automatically covered bills for families below certain income thresholds. No application required. No bureaucratic hoops. Just automatic assistance when computer systems flagged accounts that would otherwise go to collections. Similar programs followed with landlords, utility companies, schools. The foundation created financial cushions that activated automatically when families faced crisis. The brilliance was in the invisibility. Recipients often never knew they'd been helped, just found that the disaster they'd feared had somehow resolved itself. Sofia grew up surrounded by this work, understanding from earliest consciousness that their family's purpose was service. She accompanied Diane to foundation meetings, sat quietly while adults discussed budget allocations and program effectiveness, absorbed lessons about wealth and responsibility that most children never encountered. One evening when Sofia was 7, she asked a question that stopped Diane cold. "Mom, why did Uncle Marcus leave us all this money instead of using it himself?" Diane thought carefully before answering. "Because he knew we'd use it right. Not just for ourselves, though it helps us too. But for others. To give people hope when they have none left. Like Catherine gave us?" Sofia's perception remained sharp as ever. "Exactly like that, baby. Catherine showed us the way through the mirrors when we were lost. Now we show other people the way through their own difficult passages." Sofia nodded thoughtfully. "When I grow up, I want to do this too. Help people who feel hopeless." Diane pulled her daughter close, feeling the rightness of legacy passing to the next generation. "Then I'll teach you everything I know." The years accumulated like layers of sediment, each one adding depth and complexity to the foundation's work. When Sofia turned 10, Diane began formally training her in the mission's intricacies. They'd spend evenings in the study, Diane explaining financial structures, philanthropic strategies, the ethics of anonymous giving. But she also taught Sofia the deeper truths, that wealth meant nothing without purpose, that privilege demanded service, that true security came not from hoarding resources but from building communities where everyone had enough. "Some people think charity is about making themselves feel good," Diane explained one night. "But real charity is about dismantling the systems that make charity necessary in the first place." Sofia, wise beyond her years, understood immediately. Like how we're not just paying people's medical bills. We're working with hospitals to change how they handle low-income patients. Exactly. Every family we help is important. But changing the systems that hurt families in the first place? By Sofia's 12th birthday, the foundation had distributed over $180 million. The money had been converted carefully from glass as caches, gold sold to refiners, gems to jewelers, art to collectors, securities to financial archaeologists who specialized in resolving century-old instruments. Marcus's original estimate of $408 million had proven conservative. As Diane explored deeper into the mirror maze, she found caches he'd never documented. Box 847 contained bearer bonds from the 1930s worth $12 million. A false-backed mirror in the basement held paintings by artists who'd become valuable in the decades since Glass's death. A space between walls accessible only by reflecting light at precise angles contained platinum bars worth $6 million at current prices. The total wealth hidden in the Hall of Mirrors exceeded $450 million, maybe $475 million. More than enough to fund the foundation's work for generations. More than enough to transform thousands of lives. More than enough to turn Glass's legacy of theft into a legacy of healing. But success brought new challenges. The foundation's impact, despite all efforts at anonymity, began drawing attention. Journalists noticed patterns: medical bills mysteriously paid, families saved from eviction by unknown benefactors, scholarships appearing from foundations that left no digital footprint. Articles appeared with titles like "The Anonymous Angel of Portland" and "Mystery Philanthropist Saves Hundreds." The stories were warm, celebratory, but they made Diane nervous. Attention meant questions. Questions meant investigations. Investigations might reveal the source of wealth no conventional inheritance could explain. Jennifer convened an emergency meeting with the full team. "We need to create a more robust public story," she said bluntly. The anonymity was sustainable when we were operating at smaller scale. But $180 million in 5 years? That draws attention we can't simply deflect. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Volkov, agreed. We need a founder story that's true but incomplete. An inheritance that's documented but vague enough to discourage deep digging. They crafted it carefully over weeks of discussion. The official story: Diane Martinez had inherited property and assets from great-uncle Marcus Navarro, an eccentric collector who'd spent decades accumulating valuable items. Upon his death, appraisals revealed the collection's surprising worth. Rather than keep the wealth, Ms. Martinez had established a foundation dedicated to helping families in crisis, inspired by her own experiences with poverty and homelessness. All technically true. All leaving out the parts about mirror mazes, trapped ghosts, impossible architecture, and a con man's $450 million hoard hidden in spaces that shouldn't exist. The story was released through carefully chosen media outlets. Local papers ran feel-good pieces about the formerly homeless woman now helping others. National magazines picked up the narrative as inspiration. Diane gave exactly 3 interviews, all carefully scripted, revealing just enough to satisfy curiosity while protecting deeper truths. The attention was uncomfortable but manageable. And it had an unexpected benefit: legitimacy. Once the story was public, the foundation's work became easier. Other philanthropists reached out wanting to collaborate. Government agencies sought partnerships. Corporations offered matching funds. The Lillian Foundation, built on stolen money hidden in impossible spaces, became a respected institution in mainstream charitable circles. The irony wasn't lost on Diane. Sofia turned 13 the week after a major profile in a national magazine called Diane one of America's most inspiring philanthropists. Her daughter read the article with a mixture of pride and amusement. "They don't know the half of it," Sofia said. "They know what matters," Diane replied. "That we're helping people. The source of the money is less important than what we do with it." "Is it, though?" Sofia's question was sharp, more philosophical than Diane expected from a 13-year-old. If people knew the money was stolen by a con man who murdered a girl to protect it, would they still think we were inspiring? The question haunted Diane for days. She'd spent years justifying the work with the argument that stolen money could still do good. But Sofia had touched on something deeper: the moral complexity of building redemption on a foundation of crimes. She finally answered her daughter one evening in the mirror room, the space where their journey had truly begun. "I think they would still think the work was good. Maybe even more important, because it shows that evil doesn't have the final word. That cursed wealth can be transformed. That even the worst origins don't determine final destinations." Sofia walked among the mirrors, studying their reflections. Catherine understood that. She was trapped by glass's evil, but she chose to help instead of hurt. She could have scared us away or led us into danger. But she guided us toward the money and toward freedom. That's the real inheritance, Diane realized aloud. Not the money. The choice Catherine made. The choice Marcus made. The choice we make every day, to use what we've been given for good, regardless of where it came from. They stood together in the mirror room, mother and daughter, reflected infinitely in glass that had once hidden terrible secrets but now illuminated truth. The hall of mirrors had been built to deceive, but Diane had transformed it into a place of revelation about the nature of redemption, about the possibility of transformation, about the human capacity to choose light even when surrounded by darkness. That night, after Sofia went to bed, Diane updated her personal ledger. The numbers were staggering now. Over $200 million distributed. 1,247 families directly helped. Thousands more impacted indirectly through systemic changes the foundation had funded. Medical debt reform in 3 hospital systems. Affordable housing developments in 2 cities. A pilot program providing guaranteed income to 50 families for 3 years. The impact rippled outward in ways that couldn't be quantified. Children who'd received scholarships were now in college, studying to become doctors and teachers and engineers. Families saved from eviction had rebuilt their lives, some now successful enough to donate to other charities. Small businesses funded by foundation grants were employing dozens of people. Glass had stolen from hundreds. Diane was now helping thousands. The moral mathematics didn't quite balance, theft remained theft, murder remained murder, but the trajectory was clear. Evil was being metabolized into good, one family at a time. The foundation's 15th anniversary arrived with little fanfare. Diane deliberately kept celebrations muted. This wasn't about her or her work. It was about the families whose lives had changed, the children who'd found opportunities, the parents who'd escaped drowning in debt. But Jennifer insisted on a small gathering, just the core team who knew the full truth. They met in the renovated second-floor living space of the Hall of Mirrors, 6 people who'd spent 15 years keeping an impossible secret while doing improbable good. When Marcus first told me about this place, Jennifer said, raising her glass, I thought he was losing his mind. Mirror mazes and hidden treasure and ghostly guardians. But then I met Diane, and I understood. Some stories are too strange not to be true. Dr. Eleanor Chang, the appraiser, laughed. I've handled artifacts from every century, but nothing prepared me for jewelry that existed in multiple reflections before becoming solid. Or coins that changed value depending on which angle you viewed them from. The accounting, Robert Chen added with his characteristic dry humor, has been the most creative work of my career. How do you categorize income from assets that technically shouldn't exist in physical space? Patricia Volkov, the lawyer, shook her head. I've defended some strange cases, but inherited wealth from impossible sources never appeared in any law school textbook. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the folklorist who'd helped free Catherine, raised her glass. To the most successful ghost liberation in recorded history. And to the foundation built on that freedom. To Catherine, they said in unison. Diane felt emotion tighten her throat. These people had believed the impossible, protected the secret, and dedicated years to transforming stolen wealth into healing. They'd become family bound not by blood but by shared purpose and mutual trust. I couldn't have done any of this without you, she said simply. The money was here, but you all made it meaningful. Sofia, now 17 and about to graduate high school, stood to speak. I've grown up with this work. It's taught me that wealth is just potential energy. Like electricity in a battery. It only matters when it flows, when it powers something, when it lights up darkness. Uncle Marcus understood that. Catherine understood that. Mom understood that. And now I understand it too. She pulled out an envelope. I've been accepted to 5 universities. I'm choosing to study public policy and nonprofit management. Because this foundation, this work, it's my inheritance too. Not the money, though that'll keep flowing, but the mission. The understanding that we're stewards, not owners. Transformers, not hoarders. Diane's eyes filled with tears. Her daughter got it. Really got it. The money would continue doing good long after Diane was gone, because she'd raised someone who understood that wealth without purpose was just heavy metal and shiny stones. The evening wound down with stories, laughter, and toasts to past triumphs and future work. As guests departed, Jennifer pulled Diane aside. There's something I haven't told you, she said quietly. Marcus left me a sealed letter to give you on the Foundation's 15th anniversary. She handed Diane an aged envelope. The handwriting was unmistakably Marcus's. Diane waited until she was alone to open it, sitting in the study where so much of the Foundation's work had been planned. Dear Diane, the letter began. If you're reading this, you've kept the faith for 15 years. You've transformed Glass's curse into blessing. You've freed Catherine and honored her sacrifice. And if I know you as I think I do, you're probably wondering if you've done enough. You have. More than enough. More than I did in 30 years. More than Papa did in the 20 years before me. You've taken our family's burden and made it your daughter's inspiration. That's the real fortune, not what was hidden in the mirrors, but what you've built with it. But I want to tell you one final secret. Something I never told Jennifer or anyone else. There's one last cache. I found it in my final year, but I never touched it. I left it for you, for this moment when you've proven yourself worthy of its true weight. In the basement, in the ritual room where glass trapped Catherine, there's a mirror that shows no reflection. You've probably noticed it. It's been waiting. Waiting for someone strong enough to look into it and not see themselves, but see possibility itself. What's behind that mirror isn't gold or jewels. It's something glass never understood and never could have used. But you will understand. And when you're ready, when you've processed these 15 years of work and growth, you'll know what to do with what you find. Thank you, Diane. Thank you for staying when most would have fled. Thank you for seeing Catherine not as a ghost but as a girl deserving freedom. Thank you for understanding that stolen wealth could still heal. Thank you for raising Sofia to carry this forward. The mirrors showed me your coming years before you arrived. They showed me that you'd transform everything. I only wish I could have met the woman you've become. Though perhaps, in some reflection yet to be discovered, I already have. With love and pride, Marcus. Diane sat with the letter for a long time, watching late evening light shift through the study windows. 15 years. 15 years of navigating impossible architecture, converting hidden wealth, building a foundation that had helped over 2,000 families. 15 years of keeping secrets, balancing public legitimacy with private truth, teaching her daughter about responsibility and purpose. And now Marcus was telling her there was more. One last secret. One final transformation. She descended to the basement alone, carrying a flashlight though the building now had electricity throughout. Some journeys deserve the isolation of single beam light cutting through darkness. The ritual room looked different than it had 15 years ago. After Catherine's liberation, Diane had cleaned it but left it mostly unchanged, a memorial to what had happened here, a reminder of the cost of glass's greed. She examined each mirror carefully. Most reflected normally now, showing only the circular room and its simple furnishings. But in the corner, one mirror remained dark. Not broken, not covered, just absent of reflection. As if the glass showed nothing because nothing existed in its liminal space. Diane approached it cautiously, studying the frame. Carved into the wood, nearly invisible unless you knew to look, were words in what appeared to be Portuguese. O que se dá retorna multiplicado, what is given returns multiplied. She reached out and touched the glass. It was cold but yielding, like touching water that had forgotten how to flow. Her fingers sank into the surface. On the other side, her hand found a latch. She pulled, and a section of wall swung open, revealing a space that shouldn't exist, larger than the building's footprint should allow, extending impossibly into dimensions that didn't make geometric sense. Inside wasn't treasure. It was books. Thousands of them. Ancient volumes bound in leather and cloth, modern texts with crisp dust jackets, handwritten journals stacked carefully on endless shelves. The space was a library, but unlike any library Diane had ever seen. She pulled out the nearest journal. Marcus's handwriting filled the pages, but the content wasn't what she expected. Not financial records or treasure maps, but stories. Hundreds of stories about people he'd helped over his 30 years as guardian of Glass's fortune. Names, dates, circumstances, outcomes. A chronicle of transformation. Another shelf held notebooks in different handwriting, Roberto's, Marcus's father. His stories of families helped, immigrants sponsored, students educated. 30 years of his own transformation work, documented with the care of someone who understood that impact mattered more than wealth. But the rest of the books were different. They were blank. Thousands of empty journals waiting to be filled. On a small desk in the center of the library sat a single page with Marcus's final note. This is the real treasure. Not gold that can be spent, but stories that can be told. Glass had wealth to protect himself. We've spent it to protect others. But wealth runs out eventually, even $450 million. Stories don't run out. They multiply. They inspire. They teach the next generation how to see past greed to grace, past theft to transformation. Fill these books with your stories. Every family helped, every life changed, every small miracle the foundation enables. Let Sofia fill them. Let future generations fill them. Because long after the last gold coin is converted and the final cash is emptied, these stories will remain. They'll remind whoever comes after that curse can become blessing, that broken things can heal, that wealth's only purpose is making abundance possible for all. The mirrors showed you the way to gold. Let these books show future generations the way to wisdom. Diane stood in the impossible library, surrounded by thousands of blank pages waiting for stories, and finally understood. This was Marcus's true gift. Not the money, that was just material Glass had stolen. The real inheritance was the understanding that transformation was possible, that evil didn't have the final word, that every ending could become someone else's beginning. She pulled out a blank journal and began to write. Day 1. We arrived with everything we owned in 3 garbage bags. Sofia couldn't breathe without medicine we couldn't afford. The building looked haunted, and in a way, it was. But Catherine met us in the mirrors, and Marcus had left us a map. She wrote for hours, documenting their journey from desperation to discovery. The fear and the hope, the impossible architecture and the mundane struggles, the ghost who became a friend and the con man who became a paradox, his crimes enabling healing he'd never intended. As dawn light began filtering into the basement, Diane finished the first journal and reached for another. She had 15 years of stories to document. 15 years of families saved, children educated, parents lifted from despair. 15 years of small miracles funded by stolen money and motivated by murdered innocence. She wrote about Marcus and Roberto, about Jennifer and the team, about Sofia growing up understanding that wealth meant responsibility. She wrote about Catherine's liberation and Glass's dissolution, about the foundation's growth and the family's transformations. And as she wrote, she understood that this library wasn't just records. It was prophecy. These books showed that the work would continue, that the stories would multiply, that future generations would fill these empty pages with their own tales of transformation. The $408 million, now $450 million by her latest count, would eventually be distributed. Probably in Sofia's generation. Maybe her grandchildren's. But the stories would outlast the money. They'd inspire people who'd never see a single gold coin to do their own work of transformation. To take whatever resources they had, however they'd obtain them, and ask, what good can this do? What curse can this blessing heal? That was the real treasure. Not wealth hidden in mirrors, but wisdom reflected in choices. Not Catherine's imprisonment, but her liberation. Not Glass's crimes, but their redemption through persistent, purposeful, patient healing work. Diane climbed out of the basement as morning sun filled the hall of mirrors. The building no longer felt haunted or cursed. It felt purposeful. Alive with mission and meaning. Sofia was awake, making breakfast in their beautiful kitchen. You were gone all night, she observed. Find something interesting? I found everything, Diane said. The real inheritance. The one that matters. She told her daughter about the library, about the blank books waiting for stories, about Marcus's final wisdom. Sofia listened with that particular intensity that meant she was absorbing not just information but truth. So the money ends, Sofia said thoughtfully, but the work continues. Because we're not really distributing wealth. We're distributing hope. And hope is infinitely renewable. Exactly. Then we'd better make sure we document it well. Future generations will need the blueprint. They spent that day beginning the work of transferring Diane's careful records into the storybooks Marcus had left. Each family the foundation had helped became a narrative, not just numbers on a ledger but human beings whose lives had intersected with theirs. Names were changed to protect privacy, but truths were preserved, the single mother facing eviction, the child needing surgery, the veteran struggling with PTSD, the immigrant family drowning in debt. Each story ended with the same truth: transformation was possible. Curse could become blessing. Broken things could heal. Over the following months, Diane and Sofia established a new rhythm. Foundation work continued. They'd only distributed $200 million of the $450 million, leaving decades of work ahead. But now they also devoted time to documentation, understanding that the stories mattered as much as the assistance. They invited people they'd helped to contribute their own perspectives. Some wrote themselves, others spoke into recorders, a few created art expressing what the help had meant. The library filled with voices, perspectives, proofs that the work was real and the impact was lasting. On Sofia's 18th birthday, they stood together in the mirror room for a formal ceremony Diane had planned. The Foundation's core team gathered, along with a few recipients who'd become friends over the years. 15 years ago, Diane said, I inherited a building full of mirrors and secrets. I thought the inheritance was money. But the real gift was understanding that wealth means nothing unless it serves something beyond itself. She handed Sofia a key, the same key Marcus had left for Diane, the one that existed in reflection before becoming real. This unlocks the Red Room, the library, all the impossible spaces in this building. More importantly, it unlocks responsibility. The Foundation is yours now. Not just to manage, but to lead. To make your own choices about how transformation happens. Sofia took the key with appropriate solemnity. I accept the responsibility. And I promise to honor Catherine's sacrifice, Uncle Marcus's wisdom, and your example. The money will keep flowing until it's gone. The stories will keep growing long after. They embraced while the gathered witnesses clapped. Jennifer wiped tears. Dr. Martinez smiled with satisfaction. Robert and Patricia exchanged nods of approval. The transition was official. The next generation had taken the torch. But Diane wasn't retiring. She'd spend the next decade working alongside Sofia, teaching the intricacies of foundation management, introducing her daughter to the networks and partnerships that made the work effective. She'd be mentor and partner, gradually stepping back as Sofia's confidence and competence grew. Together, they'd continue converting Glass's stolen fortune into healing. Together, they'd fill the library with stories. Together, they'd prove that redemption was possible, that curses could be broken, that love was stronger than greed. The Hall of Mirrors stood on its city block, no longer a nightmare but a beacon. Its strange architecture still confused occasional visitors to the ground floor shops, but the building's true nature remained secret. Only those who needed to know understood the impossible spaces, the hidden wealth, the transformation of curse into blessing. 20 years after Diane arrived with everything in garbage bags, the Lillian Foundation had helped over 5,000 families. The $450 million was more than half distributed, but carefully invested portions were generating returns that would fund the work for decades more. The foundation had inspired others, its model replicated by philanthropists across the country. The impact rippled far beyond anything one con man's stolen wealth should have been able to accomplish. But it wasn't the money. It had never been the money. It was the choice, the daily, deliberate choice to use what you have for good, regardless of its origins. The choice Catherine made to help instead of harm. The choice Marcus made to build instead of hoard. The choice Diane made to transform instead of simply benefit. And now Sofia's choice, carrying the work forward into a future none of them could fully see but all of them had faith would continue the transformation. In the basement library, thousands of books now filled shelves. Stories of healing multiplied faster than wealth ever could. Each volume was a testament that broken things could mend, that evil didn't have the final word, that ordinary people making extraordinary choices could change the world. The mirrors throughout the building reflected all of this, not just the physical structure, but the metaphysical transformation it represented. What had been built to deceive now revealed truth. What had been designed to hide now illuminated. What had been cursed now blessed thousands. And somewhere, in whatever space exists beyond reflection, perhaps Catherine smiled. Perhaps Marcus nodded approval. Perhaps even Glass, that complicated criminal whose genius had enabled both his crimes and their eventual redemption, understood at last that the treasure he'd hidden so carefully had finally found its true purpose. Not to make one man rich, but to make many people whole. Not to serve greed, but to serve grace. not to reflect darkness, but to multiply light until every shadow found illumination and every curse found its counter-blessing.